So let's get started. This was week one for me, where I basically pursued how to develop a production workflow for cloth simulation between Marvelous Designer and Maya. So here's an outline for everything that we're going to need to do, and there's three big steps between working with Marvelous Designer and Maya. So the first is preparation. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to go into Maya and basically set up our animation. It's really important being able to work with Marvelous Designer. There's a couple of very specific things you need to do in order to simulate clothing properly. First thing we're going to do is set up our animation. Then we're going to set the scale of Maya to make sure it matches with Marvelous Designer. Then we're going to export the animation, and we're going to go into the simulation phase of the workflow. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to import our geometry into Marvelous Designer, and then we're going to basically create our garment as complex as you need or as you want for your character. And then once that is done, then you can start simulating. So the first step there would be to import your animation and then simulate it. And there's a couple different steps there, but it's pretty straightforward. And then from there, you're going to export your simulation and a couple different things back into Maya. So now at this point, we're going to be at the finalization stage. And at this point, you're polishing up and just kind of cleaning up everything and prepping it for production down the line. So this includes things like making sure that your animation is trimmed back to where it should be in the timeline, and then also creating some UVs for texturing. And this will be a little different working with Alembic caches. We're going to be using Alembic caches for the simulation. And so there's a little bit different way to go about creating UVs for that. But I'm going to go over that in this tutorial. And without further ado, let's get started. So here we are in Maya. And the first thing I'm going to do is set my project. Okay, so just open up a new scene. So here I have a pre-animated walk cycle. Now, in this tutorial, for production in particular, you're never going to be working, usually, okay, I won't say never, you're usually going to be working with a custom rig, right, or a rig that you have set up, but usually it's not a Mixamo rig or something that's, pre-made with pre-animation or whatever. So in this particular tutorial, we're using animation, custom animation. So here I've animated just a quick walk cycle. And there's a couple things we need to do first in order to set this up to export for Marvelous Designer. First thing is we need to set the scale of the scene. This is very important. If you don't have proper scale, working between softwares is going to be very difficult and cause a lot of problems in production. So go to your preferences, open up settings, and make sure that your working units are centimeter. Okay, and you can change it to whatever you want, but you need to make sure that this unit right here is the same in Marvelous Designer. Okay, so it's at centimeters, we're good. I'm gonna press save. Another thing we need to do is make sure that the scale of our rig is set to real world. Okay, so I'm gonna set this scale to 5, because that's about the actual height that I think this guy should be. Okay, keep that in mind also, because in Marvelous Designer, the real world scale of your object or your rig matters. So we have that set up. The next thing we need to do is we need to create a keyframe in this animation that is at a T-pose, A pose, or a neutral pose that is symmetrical, that will be easy to create a garment upon, right? The reason that you need to do this is because in order to create clothing easily, it's just best to have a neutral pose that's symmetrical for your character, so that you can create the clothing and then go into simulation and then begin simulating. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to grab all of this animation, and I'm going to go here to Window, Animation Editors, Graph Editor, and I'm just going to take all of this and I'm going to offset it by 24 frames right here. Okay, so we have that. That's good. And I'm also going to set this to 144. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take all these controls, go over up here to the translate rotate, and then zero out. So this creates a symmetrical pose that will be easy to create a garment on. Okay, and we're going to key that. So just go to key selected. Okay, and then real quick, because sometimes your animation presets might be in stepped mode or something. So just take that, make sure that it transitions between these two poses. Perfect. So we have our animation starting at 0, and then we have a little bit of a transition so that when we simulate, the garment settles, and then we have our animation. Perfect. Okay. Last thing we need to do is we need to bake the animation. So I'm going to go to Show, hide the curves, select this, and for the intents and purposes of this video, I'm going to get rid of these objects because we don't need them. Okay, so we have our animation ready to be baked. I'm going to click on this geometry. I'm going to go to, oh, you know what? I actually want to do it this way. I'm going to go to, not that one, this one. Select all of our controls. Animation, key, bake simulation options. Depending on what kind of controls you have in your channel box with your rig, you may want to have driven controls and shapes checked. So this is looking good. Sample by, yep. Okay, so we're just going to press bake. It's going to do its thing. Cool. So now we are ready to export. We have correctly set up our rig. We've added a T-pose and we've baked our animation. We've also set the scale to what we need it to be. Okay, so hide those controls. I select my baked geometry, and I'll go to here to cache, Alembic cache. We're going to export selection to Alembic. If that's not in your, if you don't have that option, just open up Windows, go to the plugin manager, and add it. And then make sure that this is set to time slider, right? And make sure your time slider is set to the animation that you want to export. Sometimes you'll be zoomed in on a portion of your animation and you'll forget, and then you accidentally export the incorrect amount of animation that you need for your simulation. So that's looking okay. And then remember, setting projects is very important, so we have an output for everything that we need, and it's organized. Okay, so what I'm just going to do is I'm going to go DC 400, oops, 400 simulation, or I'll do character. Okay, Alembic, export selection. It's going to do its thing again. All right, sweet. So, and then the last thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to take this, I'm going to File, I'm going to export selection, and then we're going to go here, up here to Assets, I'm going to go TC. Sweet. And basically what that is doing is we're just going to import the geometry first so that we can create the clothing. And then when we go into simulation is when we'll import the Alembic cache and simulate on that. So I'm going to export selection. It's going to do that thing. Sweet. So now we have done all of the prep work and we're ready to go into Marvelous Designer. Okay, so we've hopped into Marvelous and now we're going to bring in our animation and we're going to simulate it. So I'm going to go File, I'm going to go to Add, and I'm going to go Avatar. I'm going to go locate our geometry. Import that. Make sure again that this is set to centimeters. We're going to add. So we got our scale correctly. We're going to press OK. Cool. And then what we also need to do, and then what you can also do is you need, if you want to do your, you want to import your map, you can bring a texture just to add it to the character. Okay, so we got that. From this point, you're just gonna create your garment. So you have your character imported, you have the A pose, it's set up nicely to create some clothing on. So from here on, you're basically gonna create your clothing, and I'm gonna skip that because that's not what this video is about. I'm gonna jump to simulating your clothing. So, okay, so I've gone and I've created my garment, and it's the way I want it. It's not perfect. It's very simple, but it works for this tutorial. So you have your garment and you're ready to go into your simulating. So what you're going to do when you have all this ready is you're going to go up here to this tab, click on simulation and press animation. It's going to pull up a new kind of workspace and you're going to be able to start doing your simulation. So what you're going to do is you're going to go to File, you're going to import, and you're going to go import and press Alembic. You're going to go and you're going to locate in your Maya folder, you're going to go to cache, Leanback, and it's going to be right there. Going to import that. So centimeters 24, and that should be okay. So we're going to import that. Sweet. So we have that ready. We have our garment ready. Basically, what you would need to do at this point is just press this record button right here. A couple things to be aware of is that keep in mind your particle distance, right? So if we go back into simulation, and I select these, I'll just select one because they're all the same. Right now, our particle distance is 14, which is pretty good. It's not very high quality, but it's high quality. It's pretty good. It's presentable. Be aware of this number right here, depending on what your shot is and how close the character is to the camera. If your character is very far away from the camera, you can make this pretty high. You can make it pretty low quality simulation, or you can make the geometry pretty low poly. Because the character's far away, it doesn't really matter too much. The camera's not going to see all the details and all the little wrinkles, so you can up that pretty high. But when it comes to a close-up or a medium shot, you really want to lower this down so that you're getting some nice kind of wrinkles and folds going on in the simulation. So be aware of particle distance, and also what you might want to consider is go up here to your, I think it's edit context menu, 3D garment, and you can quadrangulate this. So if you want it to be in quads, you can press that, and it's going to basically update the resolution or the geometry of your clothing to be in quads, which is arguably better for simulating. It's kind of up to your preference. If you have a low enough particle distance, it's not going to be as noticeable, and we're also going to create UVs and stuff later, so it's not super important, but just something to keep in mind depending on what you want from your simulation. So we have that, and we're going to go back over here to the animation. And from here, you can basically just start recording your animation. So you're going to press the record button, and it's going to start recording your animation. So as you can see, what's kind of going on here, like what I was talking about earlier, is you start in your T-pose, and then you go into your animation. What this does, as you can see, it allows your cloth to settle on the character before the animation starts. That way you have the clothing basically form-fitted to your character very comfortably, so that's not jittering or moving around or kind of like stuttering before it gets into that position. Which can cause some problems if you're cutting between different shots. So we have that, and it's simulating pretty nicely. It's pretty slow. So again, your particle distance, depending on how low you have that setting, it's going to up the time of your simulation. A couple different features you can do during this phase is you can actually grab the cloth during your simulation and move it. So if you have a simulation and the clothing is kind of going in a weird direction, you can grab it and move it during the simulation, and it'll basically bake that into the cloth simulation. So if you needed to do that, with a computer like this where the GPU is not incredibly powerful, it might be more of a headache than it would be beneficial, but just something to keep aware of. Another thing to keep in mind too is that you really need to create clothing that is realistic. So in this case, I basically had to pin the clothing to this guy's shoulders here and here. So I just tacked the clothing onto the avatar. Because it just started falling off the shoulders, I made this real quickly, not really paying attention to much design or anything. I just wanted something to kind of work with. But in the case that you're working in a production and you're doing all this other stuff, if you're simulating, you really need dynamics and physics that are realistic, meaning that you need clothing that is realistically made. Marvelous Designer is very good at having clothing physics that are extremely accurate to real world. So keep that in mind. It's very important that you have all these fabric settings under here in your property editor. Make sure that those are real world and they're going to behave the way you want them to, because that's important for your animation. So we are just about done. I'm going to press stop there because we don't need any more there. So if you pull this up, you can basically just play back. Make sure this is real time so that it plays an actual 24 frames per second, and then you can play that back. So as you can see, we got a pretty nice simulation going on here, and we're about to go back into Maya, but before we do that, we need to do one more thing. So we are going to export this real quick, and you actually don't need to worry about your character geometry anymore because we already have the animation back in Maya, so it's not really a concern. You don't need to import it back or anything like that. But we do need to export our clothing. So what we're going to do is you're going to select, you're going to select all your garments. You're going to go to File, Export, and you're going to Alembic. Make sure it's this one right here because this particular type of Alembic is legacy in Maya, so it's not going to work as well as it is this one right here. So you're going to click that. Select your destination. I'm just going to go in here. We're going to do cloth 01, save. And then you get some options here depending on what you want with your object. If you want it to be thick, meaning if it has if it's double-sided, and then frames per second, you have your scale. Make sure again centimeters, and then you're going to press OK. So you're going to do that. It's going to do its thing. So once you've exported your simulation, you're going to hop back into the simulation tab right here, which is this window, and we're going to reset the garment arrangement. So we're going to press this button right here, and it's going to reset the garment arrangement. This is important because we need to basically create UVs for our clothing, and in order to do that, we need to have them flattened out like so. So once it's like this, you can go to File, Export. You can do Selected. You're going to go, I'm going to get the correct location. Maya tutorial assets. I'm going to go cloth 2D. And for namesake, I'm just going to make sure that my naming scheme is consistent. Cloth 2D. And we're going to hit export. We're going to get some options here. You can do however you wish with that. Make sure, again, centimeters. And we're going to press OK. It's going to export that. And then once that is done, we have now done the simulation. We have rearranged our garments so that we can do some UV work. And now we are ready to go back into Maya. All right, so we've hopped back into Maya, and we're ready to kind of finalize our workflow here. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to import the cache. So I'm going to go to Alembic. I'm going to press Import Alembic. We're going to select Cloth Anim 01, Import. And we have our cloth. So if we play this back, we're going to get basically real time our cloth simulation. The reason why this is so fast is because it's a cache. So technically there's not a simulation going on here. It just recorded the location of all the vertices of this cache and then basically has baked the animation there. So it's going to play back in real time, and we have a pretty good looking simulation going on. The next thing that we need to do in order to make this basically production ready, we need to have UVs for this. So if we go in here, if I'm going to my modeling tab and I go into UV, you can see that our UVs are a little crazy right now. This is our UDIM that we're working with, and our UVs are right up here. So this is not ideal. What we're going to do is we're going to, now you remember when we were in Marvelous Designer, we exported the geometry of the 2D arrangement of the garment. So we're going to bring that back in. I'm going to go to Import, and I'm going to go select Assets, Cloths 2D 01. We're going to import this. So the benefit of this is that we have our garments basically laid out flat, which is really nice for us. You'll find out later on why that is. And then also if we select this, I just select all three of these pieces right here and we go to UV, you'll notice that the UVs are the exact same as the Alembic cache. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to combine all of these. So I'm actually just going to select these three, go to Mesh, going to Combine, just like that, delete history. Okay, just double check our UVs. Okay, they're exactly the same. What we're going to do here is I'm going to just isolate this, and we're actually going to retopologize these pieces of clothing. So basically just go in here, we're going to make this live, and I'm going to speed this up real quick, and I'm just going to do a really, really quick and retopologize this. So Okay, so I've retopologized the 2D arrangement of the garment, and now we're going to transfer the UVs between these two pieces of geometry. So I'm going to bring this back. There we go. Bring this back, and we have this. So what I'm going to do here, actually, is because our UDIM is a little whack, I'm going to select these two. I'm going to select these two because they have the same UVs. I'm going to UV editor. I'm actually going to go to UV shell. I'm actually going to select all these. Yeah, those selected. I'm just going to grab those, scale them down into, oops, one UDIM. That's not what I want to do. Okay, just so that they're nice and easily set up in this single UDIM. I'm going to scale that to the edge just so we can kind of maximize our UV space. Okay. So what I want to do here is I want to take this. I'm going to take our 2D arrangement, and I'm going to shift select our retopologized mesh. I'm going to go up here to mesh, transfer attributes. I'm going to click the option box, and here we're going to go to UV sets. We're going to do world, and vertex position should be good. So I'm going to press apply. Close that, open up this, select this guy, go to UV. Sweet. So basically what we've done is we've transferred UVs from the 2D arrangement to the retopologized garment. So the benefit of what we just did is that when you transfer these attributes and you retopologize this piece of geometry, you basically, you're creating the exact same UVs between these two pieces of geometry. So if you open up the UV editor, you can see that as I select between these two pieces of geometry, we have the exact same UVs. This means that you can take this low poly version into something like Substance or Mari, texture it, and then bring it back into Maya and just apply that texture to this piece of geometry. And you're going to have a really nice piece, some really nice textures going on there. And I mean, one of the reasons you kind of want to retopologize just to lower the density of the mesh, because it's a 2D piece of cloth, so it's really doesn't need to be that dense as the original. You can see that that's just a little ridiculous. So, you know, retopologizing that just takes a little less computing time when you bring it into a different software. And so at this point, you're really ready to go into rendering. If you want to take it to Arnold and add shaders or whatever, it's basically ready for the next step in production. So yeah, this has been week 1 of the directed study. It's been a good learning experience. I think this is a very efficient workflow between the two, working with Alembic caches and setting up your animation in a way that's very easy to create garments and everything. So yeah, I think this is quite an efficient workflow, and I would definitely use it again in actual production.